Thank you everyone for coming in. It's amazing to have all of you here at our studio. My name is Ian. I'm the founder and CEO of Gantri. I started Gantri almost 10 years ago, just a few blocks from here. San Francisco is my home, and it's the first and only city I've lived in since moving here in England almost 15 years ago. So it's a special place for me, and I'm really excited to be part of the Design Week. And it's also a really special place for art and design and innovation, everything that we'll get into tonight. So yeah, really grateful to be part of this amazing community. And it's an honor to host everyone here at our studio. We're actually converting this into our first ever storefront, which will open stores in October. So I'm excited to have many more events like this to come in the near future. So tonight, I'm really excited to speak to Robert. He is someone that I deeply respect.
The story of how we met was pretty funny. It was a couple of years into Gantri's existence, and I was looking through all my customers, trying to do customer research, aka stalking my customers, figure out who they are. And I discovered that Robert bought a product from Gantri, one of our early lines.
The healthy one.
Yes, exactly. We don't sell that anymore, but it's a really cool product. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I wonder if he thinks about, 3D lighting and Gantri. So I reached out to him, and we met up, and we chatted, and I shared my vision for Gantri with him, how we want to use digital manufacturing to make design more accessible. And you said maybe ammunition can help us achieve that goal. And so we worked together and launched 10 products in 2020, which was one of our largest launches to date. Really put Gantri on the map of the design industry and really proved that design and
additive manufacturing can actually coexist. And it's possible for us to manufacture high quality, sustainable products using this new method.
So yeah, the rest of history, and throughout the years, Robert's been a huge supporter of Gantri's, obviously changed the trajectory of Gantri as a company, and made a huge impact on me personally. So just let me thank you so much for supporting us and for buying that first light. So tonight, I'm really excited to talk to you, to learn more about you, to learn more from you. So let's start.
Thanks for the introduction. I just want to say something. I've done, I don't know how many of these fireside chats, and there's never been a fireplace. So kind of disappointed that we didn't have a 3D printed fireplace.
Okay.
So Robert, we know you as the founder of Ammunition, and you and your team designed some of the most iconic consumer electronics products in the world. Square Stand, Ember Mug, the TK1, Terra Cafe coffee machine, which is my favorite coffee machine by far, and obviously our collection of lighting. And prior to that, you started Beats by Dre, which is just an amazing, fascinating company, technology company, headphones company that merged fashion with culture and sports and music and technologies. It's amazing. And before that, you were at Pentagram. And before that, you started an industrial design group at Apple. So you've had a huge career that spans 4 decades.
Don't say that.
It spans many years. So maybe we can start at the very beginning.
Yeah.
We can sort of.
You can share, how you got started in industrial design. We know that you were, somewhat inspired by your parents, and I'd love to hear more about how you started and what you think your first big break was.
Okay, let's see. That's probably a long answer. I'll keep it short. Yeah, I was inspired by my parents. I grew up in this interesting household. It was somewhat normal, other than my father was an extremely creative, talented mechanical engineer. In fact, he developed a lot of the technology in the brushless drives by IBM. But he was basically a tinkerer and an inventor, and there was always something in the garage. He built 2 boats in our driveway, that kind of thing. My mother was originally a fashion model, and then she became after she gave that up, was a craftsperson, fine artist, eventually became an entrepreneur. So that was just the kind of environment I grew up in. At that time I didn't think it was weird or anything, it was just what it was. But when you get older, you get to look back through this lens and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? What you're doing. It's like everything in our household is a project. But I actually got into design totally against my father's wishes. I was in high school. Usual thing, you go see the counselor, he looks at your transcripts and says, oh, you're good in math and science. Your father is an engineer, so you're an engineer. Go study engineering. And so I did, all right, I did that. I went to San Jose State. There's a San Jose State alumni I saw up there. And hated a year in engineering, which wasn't really engineering, it was pre-engineering, but still hated it. And decided, fuck this, I'm going to follow my mother's path. I went over to the art building. And, it's one of those things that, I don't know how much you believe in fate and the universe, but I walked in this door and saw this display case full of industrial design artifacts, the renderings and models and sketches. And I stood there, I don't know how long, probably a few minutes, seemed like an hour, and just was like, okay, this is it. And I went over and changed my major. And like I said, my dad was pissed off, and this is a quote. Industrial designers are the guys who specify the paint, and it usually peels off. But he came around. So that was how I ended up in design. It was after that I was moving back. I guess the first thing, I worked a few internships, and then my roommate, Gerard Furbishaw, from school, was working in a firm in Palo Alto called GDO at the time. And he got me a job in a model shop. And so I went there and was literally, sanding Bondo for about 6 months. And learned a lot, but I think one of the things my father taught me was that idea, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. So I found there was a project that had no design on it. It was just an engineer who was developing this product. It was a weird product. It was a hormone implanter for cattle. And I just befriended him and started working on it without asking anybody. And so what happened was the management of the office said, well, look, here's this guy, we're paying student wages who can design, let's give him more work, right? So I ended up on this project designing a personal computer, ironically, for a startup called Mindset. All by myself at the ripe age of 23. And got it done, went to market. It ended up in the Museum of Modern Art. And that was just like, that was a big break. Yeah, so the thing is, like, as I said, just, that was really a lesson of just go where you need to go and do what you need to do and worry about the consequences later. And that's how I got going.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So after that, you were credited with creating industrial design at Apple. How did that process come about? Did you apply for a job? Was it it just seems so fascinating how that sort of function was even created, let alone being led by you.
Yeah, I don't think crediting for industrial design at Apple is fair. But within Apple, we were working at Brunner, having a great time. We were working with an engineer named Bill Dresselhaus, who designed actually the Lisa computer, those of you computer historians. And he was working on a new project at Apple. This was when Frog was under heavy contract with Apple. But he wanted some industrial designer to look at this. It was a next generation computing platform. So they hired us under the guise of engineering, because it would have broke the contract with Frog if they hired another industrial designer. And we did that, and did another thing, and then that relationship ended. and started working on some mainstream projects. And at the time, almost all design, industrial design, Apple was outsourced. And we were one of many consultants working on Apple products. And so one day it was really weird because I was working for this guy named Richard Jordan, who ran this thing called product design, which was engineering design together. And I got a call from this headhunter who worked for Richard and said, we're looking to hire a new head of industrial design. We think you'd be a good candidate. Are you interested? And I talked to him and talked to a few people, and I said no, because I didn't want to go and manage other people outside, and there was no real team at the time, and that's not who I was. So I said no, and they were disappointed, but I went back to doing what I was doing at Brunner. And about 3 months later, I get this call and said, no, we want you, what do you want? So, and I was pretty stupid because I didn't think money at all. So I went and did some interviews and I said, look, if any company could support a world-class internal design organization, it's Apple. So if you want to do that, I'll do that. And they said, okay, and let's do that. And sort of like, watch out what you ask for, you might just get it. And so I decided, I figured at the time I was like 28, and thought, I'm young enough to make a big mistake and recover, so I'll do this. And so what about building a design organization, which I just viewed as another project, something to figure out, how to structure it and put it in place, but that's how that happened.
What was the most challenging aspect of building that organization from scratch?
At the time, the first challenge was, there was two perceptions we thought. One was design was not done at Apple. And the second was Apple was building beige boxes, right? Which at the time was true, right? Everything was all desktop computing, all in that color which we romantically called platinum, but let's get straight, it was warm gray. And that was what people thought of Apple. When the reality was we were starting to do things that were moving into a true consumer electronics business, moving into mobility, moving into content, CD-ROM, whatever, all these things were going on. But so initially recruiting was a little challenging, but managed to get a few people and that started going. First hire was Danny Julius, and Tim Parsi and got a few others, and eventually got Johnny to come aboard. So that was initially the challenge. The other one was, how many people here work in corporations? Yeah, so
How much of your day do you spend actually doing creative work?
The corporation, at least at Apple, is very intense then, even more so now. And so how do you create this creative team and give it the space to create and take risks and fool around and do the things you need to do to create interesting stuff. So figuring out a structure that did that, but yet kept everybody happy and off my back, so that they actually do work was one of the challenges. But we figured that out. But it was an amazing experience. It's when I started, I remember this guy Richard Jordan said, to me, he was trying to recruit me, he said, the connections you make here will serve you your lifetime. And I thought, yeah, you're just trying to get me to take this job. Totally true. I work with people I work with then. There's all these degrees of separation with people I work with then. I'm back, actually. I've been now working with Apple again for almost 10 years with Beats. It was a fantastic experience.
We'll kind of talk a little bit about design language a little bit later, but for now, after Apple, you sort of left and you went to Metagram. And obviously it's an incredibly prestigious design consultancy firms. And then after that, you left and you started Ammunition. What was that process like? You went corporation to a consultancy and then to doing your own thing. But that career path seemed to be something that I don't want designers want to emulate.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that? Like, what was your experience?
What I recommend is trying a lot of things and learning. I think that's, figure out what you want and what you like and what you're good at and learn along the way and make connections and all that. That's what those serve you. The pentagram thing was great. I mean, it was, for me, I actually, one of my early influences was Kenneth Grange. He was one of the first partners in Pentagram. He was industrial design. The other three other partners were graphic designers. One was an architect in the original 5. But I really viewed Pentagram as Kenneth. So, and it is one of the most amazing ongoing design organizations in the world, and really structured by the late Colin Forbes in an incredible way that supports creativity and talent, yet drives a high-level business. And so for me, I was guilty of Apple. I decided I just didn't want to do that anymore. I wasn't running it anymore at that time in its history. But honestly, sort of going out and like finding a space and buying a color copier and doing all the things you need to do to get bootstrap a design studio, I was like, okay, I gotta do that again. And I was approached by Kit Heinrichs at a luncheon at the Museum of Modern Art, and he said, sort of like, hey, we're looking for an industrial design partner, do you know anybody, kind of thing. And I went back and thought about it. Well, this actually makes a lot of sense. So I did that for 10 years, and it was amazing. The quality of people at part of the Pentagram were just unbelievable. I learned so much, but I kind of got to the point where there was this shift happening in industrial design that became very palpable, that it was moving from this thing that companies hired as kind of a necessary evil to make their stuff look nice or have some identity to it or whatever, to something that's going to drive their business and drive their brand, and really something that needed to be a core competency that companies had. And of course, this was driven a lot by the success of Apple, and as much of that was true in design. So I looked at it and felt like, while Pentagram was a great place, I was really the only person, the only partner out of 19 partners at that time that did what I did. And it just didn't feel like the right place to drive that. What I did learn through Apple and Pentagram was the power of a multidisciplinary focus on developing products. But what I wanted to do was create a studio that had that approach with the product at center, right? And one of the things I learned at Apple was, it wasn't just the thing, it was everything about the thing and around the thing and how you got the thing and how you learned about the thing and when it broke, what did you do, and all that stuff, right? So that was the foundation. The other thing was I had this epiphany about the business model that we practiced as design consultants, which was kind of something like, there's this cool project, I want to do it, I'll charge some money, enough to pay my people and myself, and do the work and get a really great portfolio piece. And then you see that portfolio piece go out in the world and create hundreds of millions of dollars of value, right, with effectively the intellectual property that you created. And I just thought something has to change about that model. So that was another part of the ammunition, was to explore that through revenue sharing and equity and partnerships and different ways where you could use what we had. And what we effectively started to do was view our studio as a tool for investment, and doing a lot of work with early stage companies. So that was that shift, which it was. Pentagram was great. They were really supportive. The funny thing about Pentagram was, as partners go, nobody quit. Right? The two things happen: you either fired or you died. And so everyone was a little bit shocked that someone with a healthy, thriving practice would just take him and say something else. But by the mere fact I was the only one doing what I was doing, it made it easy to just my team and the clients that we had.
Yeah.
So one day we were Pentagram, the next day we were Ambition.
And while you were at Ambition, one of the sort of companies that epitomizes this approach of starting early is Beats by Dre, which you started. What was the process like starting this company? Like, how did you meet, like, Dr. Dre? Like, how? Did you go to a party and like showed up?
That actually started when I was still at Pentagram, and it was an interesting thing. I was actually approached by this third party who had this idea of partnering with people in the entertainment industry to make products. and specifically audio products. And somehow he got wind that Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine wanted to develop some audio products. So somehow he finagled a meeting down at Interscope Records and Universal Music. And, so all of a sudden I said, okay, it sounds great. So all of a sudden here I am sitting around the table with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine, arguably two of the most iconic people in the music business ever. And talking about this idea that they really, and Jimmy, I don't know how much people know about Jimmy Iovine, but he's a genius, a crazy genius, but a genius. And really, he had done work with Steve Jobs on the U2 iPod and, saw this sort of idea of connecting the power of music with the power of technology. And realized, for a younger audience, there was no high-performance audio brand. It just didn't exist. Right? And this audience, which he knew very well. And so anyway, we met, and so here I am, like Silicon Valley design nerd, sitting there with these people, but strangely we clicked, and I understood it later. It took me a while to figure it out. It was that they viewed me as an artist. They viewed themselves as artists, not as business people, not as producers, but as artists. And they somehow got the feeling from me very quickly that what I felt what I did was an art and something they appreciated. So we always had that bond. And the music industry is a crazy, cutthroat, fast-moving, weird business, but I worked with those two guys for over 10 years, and they showed nothing but loyalty and respect, which was an incredible experience. And now it's been 10 years without us. Like we were already doing that for 20
Wow.
years. That's last man standing.
And I think, what strikes me about the whole Beats line and the brand is it's not just another technology company. It's not about function necessarily or function only. It's about creating an aesthetic, an entire sort of iconic experience visually as well.
Yeah.
Maybe can you share a little bit of how you came up with this idea of the color scheme, the way in which the product wraps around your head, and how you incorporate like fashion into the design process?
Yeah, it was. Headphones are interesting because they're arguably the first wearable technology, and one that's widely accepted by people. I mean, it's hard to get people to put something on their heads, right? You know that from a lot of failed technology. Yeah, people have always been comfortable because they can see the benefit or hear the benefit. But when I looked at it at the time, headphones are really complicated things to design. I mean, there's so many things that go into it beyond aesthetics. Obviously, acoustic quality of sound, ergonomics, comfort, adjustability, durability, how you integrate all this technology and something, weight, everything is very, very complicated. And every product up until we worked on for studio showed that, right? They all look very mechanical, very complicated, very technical. And I remember, I had a printout of some really common headphone. It was like a Technics or something, and I drew this single line from ear to ear. I thought, wouldn't that be great if I could get all that stuff just pulled down into this very simple, iconic shape? And that paired with what Jimmy really understood was, and again, consummate marketing genius. He really felt that this thing needed to be recognizable on 30 feet without a doubt what it is. Because his plan was to put it in almost every video he possibly could that came out of Universal Music at the time. Sometimes as a star, sometimes in the background. But just really, as quickly as possible, move that product image into the cultural conscience. And he was able to do that. So we really viewed it as, not, and I think it sounds real obvious, but it was kind of radical. We did view it as a piece of fashion. It's something, when that kid puts them on around his shoulders on his head and walks out of his apartment, he should feel really good. He might feel really good about what he's wearing. in part because of the association with the artist, but in part with how the thing looks and feels on his body. Right? And that was what drove a lot of it, and we kept expanding on that in terms of color and finish material and partnerships, and just kept going on.
Yeah, and I think what I find that really interesting and really exciting is this sort of so it's product categories where you really merge art and fashion with something that's traditionally known as a utilitarian product category. Yeah. And I look at some of the other products that Ammunition has designed over the years. You seem to have a very clean, minimalistic kind of design language, and so much so that like when you search industrial design on Google, the image that come up is this like clean, black and white, gray, aluminum kind of products. How do you think about these two types of design approaches or design languages that share the same roof? Is it product driven or industry driven?
In terms of what
The design language, you could have designed these as this like white, aluminum and thing, but you chose a very iconic, fashion forward.
I think it comes from a very personal place in that, so when I was in school, I was really obsessed with European modernism. That's all, While the rest of my classmates were into Atari and everything else that was going on here, I was, studying, Mario Bellini and Dina Rams, and I mentioned Kenneth Grange and a few others, and was just obsessed with that work. And I remember my senior presentation, I designed this, it was a medical product, and one of the people critiquing it was a German designer, and he said, "I can't believe an American has designed this thing." That's the way. But I won't do the German accent. But so I started out in that space and really obsessing about it. But over time, we sort of moved in and out of that. And there was a period, like I think in the early 2000s, when 3D surfacing became affordable. We just went crazy, in terms of doing any form we could possibly figure out. But what I always come back to was I really began to develop this feeling about, I feel a lot of responsibility in society. One of the responsibilities I feel is that things should last, right? And so the idea of a sort of simple, clean, geometric approach to design, there's a longevity to it. You could say it never really goes out of style. But it can also be sterile and also not feel human. So I'd always liked the idea. That's one of the reasons I like Bellini's work so much. Is that it was very clean and modern, but it was super expressive, right? And there was always a lot of motion, a lot of things happening to it. So that that's I think always been the foundation, and that's extended into our studio where we really believe in doing this very beautiful, clean, modern things, but have a character and ultimately have an ability to connect with people. So I think that what's interesting to me, one of the things that when I started learning about design, I got really fascinated by was really this level that this idea that as a species, we have this relationship with objects, right? And in many ways, we define ourselves by objects, by the car we drive, or the chairs we buy, or the shoes we wear, or the phone we use. We really use them as sort of extensions of ourselves. And in many ways, the idea of someone has authored these things for you is a way for you to connect, and we're hardwired to connect with other humans. And so I think that's something I always viewed as this opportunity with design is either directly or indirectly or abstractly connecting with people. And that's, I think, has always kept us in this sort of very soft version of minimalism, keeping it really based on character.
Do you think this expressive design is the future? Do you think we're at the end of this like corporate minimalism type wave?
I don't think we're at the end of minimalism, and everyone has their own way of expressing and thinking about it. That's just mine. And I do love to do things, and the team do things that are clean and beautiful and simple. But the things that always resonate well with the audiences we work for, the things that have a character to themselves, and express a quality or an energy or an emotion. And if you follow a very rigid, grid approach of design, you're going to miss that.
Right. Yeah, as you said, the humanistic approach, yeah, was I guess where you. Yeah. So in 2008, you wrote a book, How Great Design Will Make People Love Your Company. And why was it so difficult to convince companies back then that design is important?
Well, it was actually called Do You Matter, which was kind of a controversial title, and sometimes we ended up in the self-help section. But, it was also an observation, again, at the time, even though industrial design was expanding in its influence, I just found a lot of people didn't really understand it, right? There's still a lot of business organizations and executives, again, just sort of viewed it as making it pretty or making it innovative or, having a corporate identity. And, ultimately, as I was talking about just now, it's about, utilizing design to connect with your audience. And when you do it well, right, companies like Apple and others, they sort of shrink the gap between themselves and their constituency. And so the book was about that, sort of how, the title came from, for a couple semesters, I taught a class at Stanford, which was effectively to engineering students about design. And I'd start the class and I'd say, how many of you care Dell goes out of business tomorrow? And a couple of you guys. And I'd say, how many of you would care Apple went out of business tomorrow? And everybody understands. So why do you care? Why do you care about this company so much? And he said, well, because it makes me feel like this. It gives me a capability to do, these great things and very, very emotional. And so, what Apple had done was they created a situation where it mattered in their lives. So I felt like that was really what if you were doing a good job as a company in design, you would matter. So that was what the book was about, sort of creating that story of how that happens, getting a lot of case studies, sort of building out this notion of, it's worth doing because if you do it well, you matter to the people that buy your products.
Do you think that sentiment has changed over the past 20 years, 15 years?
Since I wrote the book?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's interesting. There is a threat going on in the editorial community that design is dead, right? Because 8 or 10 years ago, design was the garbage, right? Everyone wrote articles about how important design was and how, you're saying, well, it didn't live up to its promise, and so design is dead. And I think that's complete bullshit, obviously. What they learned, what companies learned was design is hard. Doing great design at a high level of consistency is really hard. So it's not just a question of hiring a team and investing in some technology. It takes years to build out that discipline in an organization. And so a lot of people give up because it just, they couldn't figure out how to do it. And made a big investment that wasn't very hot for them. So it's not design is dead, it's people don't have enough commitment.
And here you're also writing a new book.
Yeah, I'm trying to, it's not really a sequel. It's with the same, I wrote with Stuart Emery and Russ Hall before, and it's called Making Great. And it's from another observation, so when I look at all the work we've done, over the years, I could say, without much exception, everything is good, right? But there's a small percentage, like Beats and some others, that sort of transcended that and moved to greatness, right? So how did that happen? And when I started thinking about and looking into it, it always came back to a certain form of leadership, right? This sort of idea of the sort of maniacal commitment to the idea of building something great, a sort of purpose-built, non-negotiable purpose of bringing this thing into the world. And so as I began to break it down, realized that it's not exclusively the territory of billionaire entrepreneurs and elite athletes and Hollywood celebrities. It's really, there are things that anybody can practice to achieve greatness. So that's what the book's about, and we're just sort of getting into the writing of it. Probably take us a year to get it done. Yeah, so it's become a bit of a passion.
And that greatness, is that coming from it sounds like it's not just the leadership of a company, it's everybody. It's something that anybody can practice.
Yeah, I think if you're, of course, not everyone is going to be the next Steve Jobs, of course, but there are things there's something when I give talks, I give this short lecture on mediocrity. And how mediocrity is insidious, and mediocrity is kind of this idea of good enough is fine, just and not failing is winning, right? And so those are the things that you have to sort of counteract and sort of build into greatness, and sort of change that attitude. And again, it's about risk taking, but it's also about commitment, and also about being able to lead and drive something and not accepting good enough. And figuring out how you do that in an everyday way, how you do that when you build your team, how you do that effectively. That's what it's about.
And do you feel that companies who are struggling to adopt this design-led system or design-led thinking is because they're not striving for what's exceptional, or visionary, or powerful in their work? They're just settling for okay. That's like
we see that a lot. Some of my teams here, we're very responsible people. We push hard to make something really good, and we run into a lot of it's going to take too long. It's too many resources. We got other things we got to do. Let's do what we did last time. Sort of there's this mental model that sort of holds people back. And and like I said, it's not everything's going to be great, but. What I have seen consistently is what it is. There is this purpose that almost sits above financials, right? Of doing something and doing it well, and a commitment, and the idea of craftsmanship, right? I wish there was a non-gender bias for craft personship. It's kind of hard to say, but this idea of that just the commitment to doing it right is many times part of what it takes.
How do you think about for those of us that are building companies or creating studios, how do you think about sort of a way that we can maybe rationalize this approach in that, taking risks are inherently risky and striving for this something great is scary? How do we build up this muscle where, we feel it's okay that we fail, it's okay that we make that leap even though we don't really know what's going to happen?
Well, like I said, it's leadership. It's building an environment that supports it. It's really being cognizant of where you are and what you're doing, and driving towards building something great. You want to hit it every time, but you're not going to get there if you don't set it as a goal. Right?
Yeah. What's maybe one company or one product that you were like, okay, I really believe in this vision. And then you worked really hard for it, but it didn't actually work out.
Tell stories I get in trouble for. Well, there was one which was the Shields here. You know this one. Super disappointing. We got involved with a company called OB World Fund, OBI, and the basic idea was to develop smartphones for developing countries that were beautiful, easy to use, well designed, but could work in the economies and basically be able to build for a low cost. And we figured out how to do that. And we actually invested a lot in the company because we really believed in it. But when it came time to really doing it, the management and the people on the ground didn't have the commitment to it. They didn't want to take the time they needed. They wanted to get the product out fast. They wanted to get it out cheap. They wanted to do things they'd always done. And so ultimately it fell apart, which was really disappointing because we had done an enormous amount of work and spent countless days in factories figuring out how you're actually going to build, these phones that would sell for well under $200, but be beautiful and unique to themselves. And so that there's a number of those like that. But honestly, I can't. There's a lot of you do a lot of failures, and sometimes we've made a few wrong choices. But almost always, the things that don't happen, the big disappointments, have to do with misalignment and a lack of commitment.
How do you recover from these experiences?
you know, it's like anything. It's like being an athlete. When you screw up, you just move on to the next. You can't dwell too much on it. There's a few that still stick. You know, that sucked, but that's what most things. You know.
Obviously, we're in the heart of AI. Particularly, you know, there's a lot of new products, new announcements about products that are yet to come in the wearable AI kind of space. What excites you about this future? What do you want to see emerge in terms of the products that, you know, we might see in the next 12 months, 18 months?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's interesting, you know, that the announcement last week of OpenAI and IO and Trump is really, I think, about the fact that while AI is culturally present, it doesn't have a form. Right? It's, you know, it's right now in a form. It takes place through your smartphone, your tablet, your computer, but it really doesn't have its own form. And so figuring out what that is, I think that's all about. And we've been, the two areas we've been working a lot in is one is robotics, intelligent robotics, which is really an interesting area. And the other is interface. And, you know, without saying things I can't talk about, but really getting to interface that doesn't require a screen or anything you touch or anything. It just really can be omnipresent, which actually scares me. You know, it's like, you know, I'm already outsourcing enough to ChatGPT. I'm wondering if it's in my head all the time, making moves on making decisions on my own. But it's so. But you know, the interesting thing about technology, and it gets back to this I was talking earlier about objects and people, is it has always had a physical form. You know, and it's come through pushing buttons, or using a mouse, or touching a screen, or listening with your ears, or you know, there's always been some sort of physical representation of technology, and so that's why I think that's what's interesting for us is figuring that out. You know, the robotic stuff is different. That's really fun and interesting because if you start creating things that are living with humans but have intelligence, what should they look like and how should they behave is a really interesting question. That's something that I'm trying to figure out. But I think it's exciting, and there's a lot that's going to happen, and I don't think any of us really know what it's going to be yet.
Yes, we're obviously a manufacturer, so I want to ask you, as the last section of the questions, a few questions about manufacturing, your experience with manufacturing. So how do you incorporate manufacturing processes into your design process? How early do you start thinking about materials and different types of manufacturing processes in your design flow?
That's a really great question because it's a complicated answer because of course it's absolutely critical it's part of the process early because ultimately it doesn't matter if it doesn't get built. Right? So we could come up with the most amazing idea and it won't matter at all if we can't get out into the world. So, you know, our team is very experienced, a very high degree of technical competency, yet when we dive into something, we try and forget all that. You know, and it's always in the back of your head, and you always think about, but at the same time, when we're developing, we have an approach where we initially develop a lot of ideas around what it is we're doing. And I think that's for two reasons. I think personally I've always felt this responsibility to really explore something very thoroughly, you know, no stone unturned, and develop a lot of ideas. We also do that because when we're working with someone, it serves as a great way to really figure out where they're at, right? And what's in their heads. But initially, you know, we put a lot of the manufacturing constraints away, just because we don't want to limit ourselves. We know we're going to have to get back to it, and like I said, we know enough that it's there somewhere, but we're not discounting anything because that's going to be challenging to make. Take the attitude is that if we get to this thing and it means something and it's really valuable, we'll figure it out. And it might be painful, but we'll figure it out. And so that's but ultimately, as I said, I used to spend weeks and weeks in China. I send other people now. But spending time with the factories that are producing our work and the people that are moving it from an idea into reality is one of the most critical things we do. But you have to start and get that idea really well defined and figured out from what you wanted to achieve, and then move it into that phase. Because if you start too much with all the constraints of, what your manufacturing partner can and can't do, and what your engineering team can and can't do, and how many bodies you have available, and what the schedule is, and so forth. Those things all come into play and sort themselves out. But if you start there, you'll really limit yourself.
How do you think about new materials? So here there's a whole generation of materials that are discovered, all the time. Mushroom, leather, and seaweed, plastic, and just all sorts of new things. How do you incorporate these new types of materials and processes into your products?
Well, no, we leave that up to people like you to figure out.
Okay.
No, it's a really interesting thing. I think we're always looking for new materials. We have a real challenge, though, especially in that most of the things we work on are built in really high volumes. And so and I think a lot of people don't understand or discount the amount it takes to bring up a new material in high production.
Yes.
Scalability. Yeah, and viability and testing and everything that goes into it. So, it almost has to happen in a parallel R&D kind of way. If you're in a product that you're on, even a 2-year cycle, bringing an entirely new material into it gets really challenging. So we tend to keep our eyes open in terms of what's happening, and we're starting to see something show up out there that looks viable and has been vetted, and we can bring it in. And we experiment with our own stuff. I think what we end up doing a lot more is taking existing materials and finding new ways to use them. We did an NFT display for a company called Canvas, and we wanted to build a frame out of wood, right? Like a picture frame. But the wood needed to house cameras and sensors and other pieces of technology in a very precise way. And wood's an organic material. It expands and contracts and heat and moisture and so forth. So, figuring out how we're going to use it. Same way when we did the Adobe Ink, which was a stylus, we wanted this form that was triangular but it twists, right? And it was aluminum, but we didn't want any seams, so then we wanted to figure out how you could do that. So we found hydroforming and did it with hydroforming. And so what we tend to do a lot is find these materials which are well understood, but then figure out new ways to use them and develop them. That tends to happen more. But yeah, it's always challenging when you find this really great material. That's so cool. I want to use it. It's great, and then you start working and you figure out, there's only one source for it in the world, and they don't make a lot of it right now. Yeah, they want to ramp up, but and wait a minute, no one's ever tested it for flammability and so forth and so on. So it's a really challenging thing.
So in 2018, as I mentioned earlier, we met, and you were really excited about helping Gantri build our platform and our vision. And we just launched Gantri Made last week. What do you think about that? Thank you.
I think it's really cool. I mean, the reason I bought that lamp back in 2018 was, we, of course, were using 3D printing as part of our process to prototype and test other manufacturing methods, right? So we're using it to be able to validate injection molding or machining or something like that and do it quickly. And I thought, well, wait a minute, what if that was what we were designing for? It was actually 3D printing. And here's a company and a guy that's figuring out how to do that. So let's go work with them and understand what that means. And then we got the opportunity to design for Gantri. It was really great for 2 reasons. One was, okay, all of a sudden we can change a lot of the rules and boundaries we put ourselves on how we build a form or an enclosure. No longer worry about draft, no longer worry about parting lines, no longer worry about collapsible cores or anything like that, right? You just print it. And then, even better, we could see the results really quickly. We didn't have to wait a year or so, whatever.
Design freeze and
Yeah, so, within a mere months or weeks of finalizing something, we had it, right? So that was really exciting and fun, and I think it is the future. And then after watching you and all you've done to figure all this out, and we were talking earlier, you've sort of taken on all the pain of figuring out how to do this, at a degree of volume. And now to see you doing this, opening it up as a platform, I think it's cool because it's just, the more we can reduce barriers to people building things and getting them out in the world and do it responsibly, I think the more interesting things we're going to see. So, it's cool.
thank you very much. I want to open up the questions to the floor. Join the binding.
You have questions? Robert, can you guys hear me?
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of?
Yeah, that's right.
Is this working? Yeah. Okay. So, I read a book about Johnny Ive where you were interviewed and you said that they can put on your grave that's the man that discovered Johnny Ive,
Yeah.
right? And now he just sold his company to OpenAI for $6 billion. What do you think about this?
Good for Johnny. Yeah, I used to make that joke. Look, he's an amazing individual. When I hired him, when I first met him as a student, he was doing work that was technically light years ahead of what any student should be able to do. An absolute committed individual to doing good work and this idea of craftsmanship and getting it just right. And then he's become, obviously through the work of Apple, such an influential force. So I think it's, for him, it's like the next thing to do, right? Is figure out this new thing we all call AI, and what does it mean in its physical form? And honestly, that valuation is something I can't quite figure out the math on that one, but again, good for Johnny, and I'm glad it's happening. So I think it's great. It's just moving to the next thing.
Hi everybody, my name is Andre. My question is, if we take a look at the intersection of manufacturing, distribution, and digitization, particularly for digital manufacturing, how do we see that coincide in the middle, maybe with AI and what that marketplace could kind of look like? From my understanding, technology with 3D printing has significantly advanced as of 2022 and has really democratized this for many creators. Social media has essentially made distribution a flywheel to their work to get more sales and packaging wheel sales and these kinds of things. Creates more sales on and on. But I don't quite know if digital has actually, there's a platform for that at significant scale. Is this something we're kind of thinking about, or where do you see the potential for digital designs? And let's say there was a 3D printer in everyone's homes in one day. Is that a big opportunity here? So intersection of digital manufacturing, distribution, and then just digital designs.
So are you suggesting that the way things are delivered to people are essentially digitally into their own 3D printer, and then they show up in their homes?
It feels like we might be on a trajectory that's significantly expanding just because of the technology really making it from something that's just very challenging and finicky to more plug and play. And I'm seeing a lot of parents gifting this technology for their kids and children. And it seems like that adoption curve is going pretty high, but I don't know if at what scale.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, it's almost a better question for Ian in terms of to what capability might we see out of 3D printers in the future, right? In terms of being able to do something complete. I mean, we did a project for a startup years ago that was around 3D printed circuit boards, right? So they were able to basically 3D print the electronics that would go inside the products, right? So you can see a path where that's possible. I think we're a ways to get there, and it's you start to wonder what kind of limitations would that box in your home have? What would it be capable of? What not? So forth. But it certainly seems a viable concept at some point in the next decade, where you're basically buying a piece of digital information that pops out of something in your home. To what degree or to how many options that'll take, who knows? It's hard to say.
Yeah. Our take is, my understanding of your question is what role does AI play with digital design and manufacturing? And our take is we're here to support human creativity. And manufacturing is hard, right? Like it's not the 3D printer that's difficult. It's the entire ecosystem of bringing something to life, from design to prototyping to getting access to components to certification to international logistics, manage the supply chain to fulfillment. Like all of that is really, really hard. And our role in all of this is to make that. And for us, that's a great opportunity for AI, for vision systems, for automation, which is to take something that's very difficult, simple, so that we can provide more access to more people in more places, right? So I think that's what we see the opportunity for AI and for innovation. We also see, and frankly, on all of our teams use AI for very fundamental things like creating questions in ChatGPT and creating concepts for tutorials. Like these are things that we use. And my take and my belief is AI as a tool is able to help creative people become better at what they do. So one example is we've been working with this video agency to create a animation video, and my creative director, he had this amazing idea for a video, and it would have taken the agency like $1 million worth of rendering to make that video come to life. But with AI, we can generate that video in a much faster, much more cost-effective way, so you can deliver the same vision, same story in a much cheaper, simpler way. So more creatives will be able to make better videos or more better videos, right? So I don't see it replacing design. I don't see it maybe very fundamental, simple designs, but I don't see it replacing the discipline. If anything, it's going to accelerate and sort of empower more better ideas. And we are there as a company to help realize these ideas in a physical world.
Hi. I want to know what was the last product you bought online, how you found it, and why you bought it.
Oh man, I think about that one. Well, it's interesting because, given what's been going on politically, my wife has forbidden me from using Amazon anymore. So. but I do it clandestinely. This is going to sound really, really exciting. The last product I bought online was a power washer. Right. I found it by Googling best electric power washer out there and reading some different reviews, and found one that seemed to make sense, and ordered it and bought it. So it shows you what I do on my weekends.
Was it like going to Wirecutter and finding the best power washer?
Yeah, actually it was a Wirecutter. It was another, I can't remember, it was in a publication. But typically I'll look for some, trusted opinion on something, right? I don't trust Amazon reviews, so I use those with a grain of salt. I tend to look for an editorial that I trust that has an opinion on something and use that as a guide point.
Did you like the way it looked?
What's that?
Did you like the way the power washer looked?
Sorry, he was coughing. Sorry.
Did you like the way the power washer looked? Like,
Yes, I do, actually. It has a lovely bright green accent. Black, yeah, of course.
I mean, well, I buy a lot of skincare online. So I just go as vitamin C serum, whatever you like. Miles and more up.
Oh, hey, name's Jalen. Quick question. Given your experience starting multiple successful design studios, which is rare, I don't think you get enough credit in our industry for that. And given what we're seeing with the value chain shifting to AI away from hardware products, and also the fact that our industry doesn't really benefit from the ZIRP phenomenon that we experienced in like 2013 to 2019, zero interest rate phenomenon. So we don't see the same amount of capital going into hardware products. If you were to start a studio in 2026, how would you build your team and how would you deal with the inbound? Get clients.
That's a good question. I don't know if I'd do a lot differently. I mean, it's interesting. I'm surprised no one's asking too much about AI. That's like, yeah. But you know, what I'm seeing, how AI is affecting us. You know, I have this benefit. As much as I don't like to admit it, I've been doing this for 4 decades, and you see, you know, these waves of technology that change how we work. Right? It started 2D CAD, 3D CAD, 3D printing, surfacing, visualization, but when you look at every one of those and look back, what that did was it lifted a burden off us, right? I mean, I went from using my HP calculator, and when I started in design, you had to be really good at trigonometry to figure out how to design parts, right? That all went away. And that successively happened. So what's been going on lately, and with the automation tools we're seeing, is it's not really eliminating the need for designers, it's giving us more time now. But that will continue to change because we'll use some concept generation tools, but honestly, we use them kind of right now as just inspiration fodder because what they put out isn't really that great. But you know, it's different. It's kind of a different viewpoint. That'll get better, but what I see happening to our roles as designers moving to this idea of producer, director, editor, right? And using those tools to create, but still sort of driving what they are. Now, you know, the sort of big worry that people have about in design is AI going to replace me? You know, again, I might be a little old school, but I don't think that's going to happen. And again, it's back to the thing I was talking about, human connection. You know, you can feel it when it's not there, and I think people seek that out. And you know, I have one of my former partners at Pentagon, Paula Scher. I remember Paula Scher. She's amazing. She's very outspoken. I was one time heard her giving a rant at a client that was complaining about her billings, and she made this thing and said, "You're not buying them time. You're buying every thing I've ever designed. You're buying every sketch I've ever drawn. You're buying every painting I've ever been to. You're buying every building I've ever gone into. You're buying every movie I've ever seen. You're buying every meal I've ever had, and so on and so on." Well, I watched this guy just shrink, right? But there's a real truth to that. So I think, so back to how I'd start, I mean, I still, you know, for us, in our studio, the talent and quality of people we have is, I often say, we're not in the design business, we're in the talent business. And that's what it's all about. So I still start with that core talent. The skills they might need may be different. The experiences they might need to be different, but I still start with building some really amazing designers.
Robert, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone.